Welcome back to the Potter Discussion. This is episode 86. I'm your host Oscar, and on today's episode, we will be changing what happened at the very end of the Harry Potter story. Let's go. Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Potter Discussion. This is episode 86. Man, we are blowing through these episodes, and I'm very excited for today's episode because we are going to be changing the end. We have been doing a lot of these changing episodes, changing this, changing that, but I think they are very important, so I am glad we are doing them. Before we get into today's episode, I will remind you that the links are in the show notes below. If you have any questions, comments, topics you want to hear on the show, Quizmaster questions, or just messages you want me to know in general, use those two links in the show notes below. They are in the show notes. You can send in a voice submission using the SpeakPipe page, or just send in some text using the Google form. Things at the Potter Discussion Instagram are doing just fine, so if you want to go check that out, that would be absolutely sublime. Just search at the Potter Discussion, and you'll get served with so many cool things, updates, memes, fun facts, so go ahead and check that out at the Potter Discussion. But let's just go. Let's just get into this. I am super duper mega excited. There's no way this is going to be the only, changing the end episode, because there is just so much to unpack. But I'm just going over some pretty big ideas that I really would have liked to see. And it might not have been something that I'm like, woo, that happened. I would have been like, woo, they decided to make a really big decision in the story. And you'll find that is the exact case with this first one that I think, okay, prepare yourself. I'm starting out with probably the biggest one. I think Ron should have died. And if your brain is exploding, you're not alone. I was like, why do I think that? Why do I think that? Well, I am pretty sure I would have liked for Ron to have died. Switched with Fred, because two Weasleys is kind of a lot. So Ron kind of is, the childhood part of Harry. Ron is really the person who was, if he would, catch, bubbles in the field while skipping through, with the wild grass. That's kind of like what Ron is. But for Ron to die, it kind of signifies the end of Harry's childhood. He's done with school, he's done with Hogwarts, and he's moving on to bigger and better things without Ron. And that's just something that I feel like the filmmakers could have foreseen as something that would really be a hard cut for Ron to not be in this future story. I feel like that's something that would really affect the story, but in a good way. Harry would have to branch out in the way he communicates and really grow as a person in order to continue living in society as a valued member, because he has to find other people to, have that Ron relationship with. Of course, you will still have Hermione, but without Ron, Harry himself has said that Hermione is great, but she will never be Ron. So if Harry can find another Ron, or even multiple, I feel like he will really excel as a human being and just be much better off. And I'm sure now you're thinking, well, what does Hermione do if Ron and Hermione get married? Well, that's coming later, so stay tuned. But back to this Ron thing. So I feel like, I'm saying this a lot, but I think that if Ron was killed, if Ron was in Fred's place, the family would have a harder time kind of overcoming that, because as much as they love Fred, I'm not saying Ron is better, but I feel like Ron is a more central part of the story. So J.K. Rowling would have to find a way for Ron to almost be, more mourned, because Harry would be feeling that much more than if Fred died. I'm sorry, Fred. But I'm just thinking that Harry might be more sad if Ron died, because he would be devastated if Fred died, and he was. He thought it was his fault. I mean, it was, but we don't talk about that part. But Ron is more of a core part of who Harry is. So for Ron to not be there anymore, for Ron to be dead, Harry really is struggling, and he really would have to find a new way to live, because Ron, Harry, and Hermione. Harry, Ron, and Hermione. That's the iconic three people. That's the iconic, that's the group. If I think of it like the three iconic people, that's probably who you think of. And without those three people, I feel like the band broke up. What do? Well, they have to find new members. So Harry will have to it forces Harry to, really think about his past life and acknowledge all the mistakes he made and really grow from them. So if Ron died, it would have been a really sharp cut from childhood to adulthood. And that's something that we really, really needed, because I feel like it went from, childhood to, childhood but with kids, So it didn't feel like Harry was an adult. I mean, sure, they gave him a comb over and a fake beard, but still, that was not, I saw seventh year Harry 100%. There was no way that was like 19 years later? There was no way it's 19 years later. So that's just my thoughts, but let's move on. And we're back once again. So now I should talk about some of the deaths. There were a lot of deaths, like Fred, of course, that was the big one. But there was also a couple that I feel like maybe shouldn't have happened. And that's what we're talking about today. Well, I shouldn't say today, but right now, let's discuss Lupin and Tonks. They were killed in the Battle of Hogwarts, and I don't think that should have happened. So let me explain. Lupin and Tonks just had a kid, Teddy, and they were killed in the Battle of Hogwarts without a whole big, thing. It was acknowledged that Lupin and Tonks were dead, but I don't think it wasn't as much of a whole ceremony as I would have thought. So we only passed over their bodies and heard Lupin talk with the Resurrection Stone in the movie, and I think we did hear a little bit more about that in the book, but I feel like there was no cause, there was no effect. If Lupin and Tonks' death was the cause, there was almost no effect to what that was. And although I think Harry might have been named the Godfather, but I don't know. So what I'm trying to say is it was pointless. Their deaths almost had no effect, and they really left Teddy out in the wild, pretty much, without any no parental figures, without anything in any way to survive. But Lupin did say that other people will tell him what his mother and father died for, but it's still much better to have his parents tell him themselves. But now they can't because they're dead. And that's just something that when I saw that, when I read that, when I watched that, I was just thinking to myself, why did they do that? Why did the filmmakers decide that killing Lupin and Tonks and not even making a big deal about it would be, a good thing? Why would that, of all things, be apparent? And they decided to do that maybe because, it should be, the Battle of Hogwarts should be all about loss, and that should be, part of the loss. But Lupin appeared when Harry used the Resurrection Stone, and that means Lupin meant so much to Harry. So why didn't they focus on Lupin more? And I know they did, so you can put away, your microphones and megaphones to shout at me. But all I'm saying is Lupin and Tonks didn't get acknowledged as much as I think they should have. And it's to the point where I don't think they should have died. Teddy could have gone on so much better with his parents there, just like Harry. And he could have, survived better with his parents too. So we didn't even meet Teddy. We saw a picture and that was it. But still, I feel like for Tonks and Lupin to die, it wasn't as this whole thing. I felt like this whole thing was supposed to happen. Like with Mad Eye, they were, standing there and he didn't come back, and Bill said Mad Eye's dead, and it was like the whole thing, and everyone was like, oh my gosh, no, Mad Eye's dead. But then with Lupin and Tonks, it was just okay. Like, that was it. That was all of it. And everyone felt sad and was, depressed that they were dead. But still, there wasn't this whole thing. And I feel like there should have been. Well, okay, well, we're back, and I was just laughing at the, what I wrote in my notes. So, when this chords play, I always look at my notes to see what the next point is, and I just saw that I wrote, Harry plus Hermione married! In all caps. But that is the next talking point. I feel like Harry and Hermione should have been married, and that's assuming that Ron had died. And if Ron had lived, I do think that Hermione and Ron should have been married, and they did, which was, I think, a good decision. But if Ron didn't survive, like I would have liked him not to, I think that Harry and Hermione would have made a good couple. And that's just because they've been friends for so long and they know each other so well. They would have made a really, really good relationship. And that's partly because they've shared so many experiences. Ron left and Hermione didn't in the 7th book. Of course, that was partly because of the Horcrux, but surely friendship is more powerful than the Horcrux, but guess not. But Hermione stayed, and they had this whole, togetherness thing. But Harry and Hermione, their bond wasn't as strong as Harry and Ron, but it was a different kind, almost. And I don't think there's any romantic feelings between them for the beginning, but I think all the things that they went through, like the Battle of Hogwarts, searching for Horcruxes, they would almost need each other because they're the only two people who had ever known what they had gone through. So it was almost fate that they would have gotten together if Ron, hadn't been there. So Harry and Hermione, if Ron had died, Harry and Hermione will probably have been almost the only two people to have ever destroyed Horcruxes, of course, besides Dumbledore. And I say that because, actually, quick fun fact for you, only 2 wizards have ever created Horcruxes. And that is, of course, Tom Riddle and the wizard who invented them. That I know his name started with an H, but I unfortunately cannot remember it at this time. Just looked it up, and it is Herpo the Foul, or Herpo the Foul. What a solid name. If my name was Herpo the Foul, man, I would have it so easy, and everyone would be like, "Oh, I loved your name," and I'm not gonna make fun of it. Oof, Herpo the Foul. So yeah, Herpo the Foul, but Herpo the Foul only made 1 Horcrux, which is actually kind of surprising considering he invented them. But if you've know a little bit about Horcruxes, you'll know that many people have tried to create Horcruxes, but they have failed, and they died. So not exactly a wide assortment, but only Herpo the Foul and Tom Riddle have succeeded. Of course, Tom Riddle made 8, but Herpo the Foul only made 1. He did live until 700, so congrats. But still, 1 is not very much, and maybe he didn't even know. I don't think he invented the concept of only being able to split your soul 7 times, but he did invent the concept of 7 Horcruxes. Of Horcruxes, not specifically 7. But maybe that it was discovered that you can only split your soul 7 times later, and maybe that is another contributor to the fact that only Tom Riddle and Herpo have Horcruxes, because people have tried to make a dozen, and they have died because they don't have any soul in their body, and that might be part of the reason why they didn't have any Horcruxes. But that is it for this segment. So continuing on this train of thought of Harry and Hermione, I think another important part of this is that they both become Aurors. As we know from the Cursed Child, Harry becomes an Auror along with Ron, and Hermione becomes the Minister of Magic. So good job, Hermione. But I feel like it would have been more meaningful if Harry and Hermione had both become Aurors. And that's because it seems weird for them to go into the Ministry and go, okay, bye. Leave each other and never see each other for the rest of the day. That just seems like something that is weird and not exactly, Harry Potter-like. If, a couple in any fiction story get married, they aren't just going to separate. That's a horrible story. But, of course, that's probably a smart thing to do if Hermione is going to become the Minister of Magic. You should probably do that, but it is something that if we're continuing with this, theorizing about what might happen, if Harry and Hermione both went into the field of being an Auror, it would have been very, very convenient and just fit better. It seems weird, and I'm saying this a ton, but it seems weird for them to go into separate jobs, as a fictional married couple. That's something that I don't think the story would permit. That's something that just doesn't happen in fictional stories. So that's why I think they should both become Aurors. And of course, Hermione is a great witch, so she would, of course, do very well as Minister of Magic or as an Auror with Harry. And if she did choose to be an Auror with Harry, I would absolutely say, yup, do that. But with Ron in the picture, it's definitely good for her to be, Minister of Magic. And I know I'm contradicting myself, but because Ron is an Auror and Hermione's Minister of Magic, and guess what? They're married, but they're having separate jobs. That's just something that happened, and I don't agree with that. I'm just saying it would be better for them all to go into Aurors, because splitting them up, right after defeating the forces of evil and, making, great friends with each other and having their bond go closer together. But nope, okay, separate jobs now. Bye. It's like saying goodbye to your college friends after knowing them for, 20 years since you were a kid. So this is something that is weird and you don't feel like it's right. So I think that's exactly what happened with Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Harry and Ron went to a field that was just for them, and Hermione decided to go into the Minister of Magic. Yes, they still talked to each other. Yes, they had contact, but not nearly as much as they would have if they were all in the same job. And we're back talking about Harry this time. And this is an opinion that a lot of people didn't think about. Not many people thought about this, even though it was kind of big. So Harry didn't keep the resurrection stone. And I know what you're going to say. Well, of course he couldn't. He would have come back to life if he was killed. And I know he dropped the stone, very obviously, in the woods. What happened to it? I don't know. And he didn't even go back. He didn't think that, maybe I should go back and, take this all-powerful 1,000-year-old deathly hollow that I just so conveniently dropped right in the middle of the Forbidden Forest. I guess that just never crossed his mind. I don't know what to tell you. How did he not realize that he didn't go back for the Resurrection Stone? And maybe he was thinking, it's not good for society. I shouldn't curse society with this Resurrection Stone. But still, you should put it in a safer place in the middle of a woods. Come on, at least bury it with Dumbledore or something. And of course, Dumbledore's grave was robbed, but still, put it in a place that Dumbledore, under Dumbledore. No one would he definitely put it under Dumbledore's dead body. No one's gonna think that. But he could put it anywhere, absolutely anywhere, other than the middle of the forest that's highly populated and, very, very active in terms of magical creatures. Even the centaurs or the wood nymphs. I wonder what would happen if a magical creature had the resurrection stone. If they would also have the same effects as a wizard or a witch. I don't know. That's a discussion for another day. But it just feels too obvious and it's just such a plot hole. The resurrection stone, a deathly hollow that's 1,000 years old, imbued with the most powerful magic almost ever, once was a Horcrux owned by Voldemort, tried to destroyed by Dumbledore, and you just leave it there. He dropped it, and that was it. I don't know. That's just something that is never going to happen in a million years. It's like even people today, if you like drop, I don't know, a tennis ball, you're going to go after it. And it's the smallest things that really matter. But with Harry, he just goes, no, the Resurrection Stone. I don't really want it. And it's kind of the Resurrection Stone. That's not, no, that's not the thing you leave in the woods. But he decided to leave it in the woods. So a round of applause for Harry for making a very smart decision. I feel like, man, he really grew. That was a good decision on his part. But let's get out of here. So we're sticking with this Harry trend, but there's something that I feel like was so obviously overlooked, it must have been on purpose. So Harry was put into the profession of an Auror. Great, that's what I expected. That's what everyone expected. But why didn't he become the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher? That's a little bit of a big plot hole. Yes, grammars. But pretty much what I'm saying is Harry was such an amazing Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher when he was in the 5th year. He taught like almost pretty much the entire class of the 5th year that, Defense Against the Dark Arts, and he just taught them all really well. They all learned a ton of useful spells. They mastered a really wide selection, and he made a really big impact. That was when his 5th year. He was 15 years old, and he was a good teacher. So if he was a good teacher at 15, how good of a teacher could he be in, say, his 50s? How good of a teacher could he be then? A good teacher or a great teacher? A fantastic, wonderful, amazing? Probably all of those things. So why didn't he do it? And it seems a little too obvious. I wonder why J.K. Rowling decided that was not a good option, why that was not a good thing to do. But I think in this situation, it was more that Harry would have been, she was choosing for Harry to be an Auror, and not specifically thinking that she didn't want him to be a Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, but that she wanted him to be an Auror. And both of those roles is really fitting for Harry, and I think it works for him to be an Auror and a Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. But it feels too, that's his thing. Defense Against the Dark Arts is his thing. And maybe they were thinking that being an Auror is literally defending against the Dark Arts and not just teaching it. But for him to teach it, he's giving a whole, he's giving, thousands of students the knowledge that he has. And that is effectively spreading his knowledge much, much wider than just him. He's giving everyone else the knowledge that he had. And I think Harry would have been one of the best DADA teachers ever. And that's just something that I don't think they thought of. And of course, I would love it if they just changed the canon, but that would be horrible because no one would remember, and they would always say, yeah, he's a great Auror, this and that. But that's kind of a strange situation because then all of the friends would be a different job. And I think that's another awkward part of it. Ron couldn't come back and teach. Maybe he could be, the gamekeeper. I don't know, but he would never, of course. So that's another awkward part of it. Harry would never stick with his friends, and he wouldn't be able to see them very often. So that's another part of it, but if the friends and the location and the, requirements were no part of it, being a DA teacher for Harry, I think is a much, much better option than just sitting behind a desk and running out, casting your spells and waving your little wand things that the kids call these days wands, at mean people that do mean things. That's not really what I imagine Harry doing, but teaching the next generation of the future of wizards and witches that are going to shape how we see Earth. And that's something that I don't think they really hit upon. The filmmakers couldn't quite make it there. We aren't going to change it now, but we can at least complain about it, so that's a plus. But let's move on. So, sticking with this theme of, coming back to teach, I think Hermione should have followed Harry back to Hogwarts. And of course, again, assuming that Ron didn't quite make it out unscathed, this is another very effective way for them to stay together and also have a very effective job. And what job does she come back as you ask? Well, I think she should come back as the charms teacher. I was considering between transfiguration and charms, which one was better. And transfiguration is amazing, but that's just, changing things, switching things, and that was a very strong subject of Hermione's. But I feel like charms is more widespread. You can do so much with charms, and that's something Hermione really excelled at, of course, along with transfiguration. But that's more of a, you don't go down the street and, change a tree into a bat just for fun. You go in the street and wave your wand and, the rocks fly at your way. That kind of thing. That's more of what you do. That's more useful. You don't have a use for a lot of the transfiguration stuff you learn, but you have a lot of use for the charms you learn. So Hermione's a really great teacher, and I think she would do a very fantastic job at being the charms teacher. So if she moves back to Hogwarts with Harry and taught, the students would have quite the powerhouse of teachers, of course, assuming that the other teachers are also good, also up to snuff. But, that's another interesting point, that Hermione could also come back and teach. And there's still so many mysteries with teaching, like, do they get paid? Where do they sleep? Do they go away for the summer? But there's just so many factors, I think, we can just assume that both Harry and Hermione would do really, really great as teachers and would really thrive and help their students with a lot of stuff. That's what Harry and Hermione excelled at. Both of them were really, really good at helping each other through things. For example, whenever Harry and Ron were having trouble with their homework or something like that, Hermione would step in and help them by, of course, she would never let them actually copy, but she would look over their work and do some corrections. And they were usually pretty good, that's a plus, but both Harry and Ron really learned a lot from Hermione, and both Hermione and Ron learned a lot from Harry. So Harry and Hermione will come back as teachers to teach even more students is almost a perfectly fitting role for both of them to have. So now we're going back to the Battle of Hogwarts, and we're talking about everyone's favorite half-giant gameskeeper, Grop. Yes, Grop. I'm just kidding. Of course, it's Hagrid. And I would have really liked to have seen Hagrid being a much larger part in the Battle of Hogwarts. In the movie, I don't think he was part of it at all. He was just captured in the woods, and the only thing he did was carry Harry's apparently lifeless body, but that was it. But in the book, I think he did get thrown through a window by Grop, but that was it. We didn't directly see him doing anything. So I would have liked to see Hagrid doing more of that, and that's because Hagrid is another big part of Harry's childhood life at Hogwarts. And to see him fighting alongside Harry is a big part of, the cutting the ties. Seeing that Hagrid is, really not being the big friendly giant that everyone sees him to be, but really causing some harm. That really cuts another tie of, I don't know. There's a lot of different strings connecting Harry to his childhood, and one by one, with Ron's death, you snip one. With Sirius's death, you snip one. With Hagrid's fighting, you snip one. And with every one you snip, it goes across to the other side and connects Harry to his adult life. And having that big, lash and all the strings being cut at once back to his adult life, they didn't all stick. So if they were all cut like one, and not the whole thing at the same time, it would have been much easier for Harry to transition into being an actual adult and not just a kid with a beard and a comb over. That's something that I don't think is good. Harry should have been portrayed as much more of an adult. He should have been transitioned into the adult Harry Potter and not, the boy who lived, but the man who lived. And they didn't transition Harry enough, so it is still seeming like he is a boy. A kid, a child. And that might be because we never see his, adult, almost coming of age. We literally see he is 17, we literally see him turning 17, but we don't see him getting married, we don't see him doing this, we don't see him doing that, we don't, all the things that adults are known for doing, we don't see him doing that, so we can't change the way we see Harry when he turns into adult. But if Hagrid is another part of the battle, it's just all of Hogwarts is fighting, and that's something that Harry has to realize. It isn't the forces of good over the forces of evil. It's deciding which regime is going to better humanity. It's pretty obvious from the start that it is, of course, Harry's. But he has to see that other people are also fighting for him and with him. And that will just further his own, I am an adult and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. He has to take control. And that's a big part of being an adult. Taking control and being dependent. So for Harry to not do those things is really tough. But if Hagrid, it's more symbolic than literal. But if Hagrid was also fighting, Harry would have seen that it is much more than, him and a couple of his buds, fighting, a mean guy. But it's the entirety of Hogwarts against Voldemort and his army, and coming out on top. Should have really let Harry groan, but he didn't, which is unfortunate, but acceptable. Well, that is just about it for today's episode. If you have any questions, comments, or topics that you would like to hear on the podcast, definitely send me an email. My email is thepotterdiscussion@gmail.com. That is thepotterdiscussion@gmail.com. Things over at the Potter Discussion Instagram are doing pretty fine. If you want to go check that out, go on your Instagram app, search up at the Potter Discussion, and follow. You will have some great memes, fun facts, and updates for the episodes that are coming out. Also, some fun quizzes. If you could just scroll down your podcast app of choice, tap those 5 stars, or even leave a written review. That could help me out more than you can ever know and help other listeners find the show. As always, the links in the show notes down below are available if you have any questions, comments, topics, Quizmaster questions, or anything you want me to know. You can submit a voice submission using the SpeakPipe link or a text submission using the Google form. As always, use this information to your advantage, and I will see you later.